So for everyone in the room, what we do here at Strategy with Sara is really lean into the fact that social audio provided us with access to have conversations with people doing the things, right? So often those were limited to people chatting, talking shop amongst their peer group. And it would be like, how can I get in this conversation? Or you'd hear someone speak at a conference and maybe you get to ask them one question, but you wouldn't get to actually have that dialogue and just have a conversation and get to know the people doing the things. So I want to start, Tara. So the show's called Strategy with Sara. You and I are so aligned. And I know that Been There, Done That is all about strategy. So start telling me about like what you're doing these days and what it means for everyone who's listening. Like, why is strategy where it's at?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, Sarah, and so good to reconnect with you on the space. So I started basically at the holding companies on the advertising and media side, so both creative and media, and always for the past like 10, 12 years in a growth capacity. So really driving revenue, managing the marketing of those agency brands, because ultimately it's the same machine that has to generate, right, and help grow the business. And all the companies I've been with have really always put strategy front and center, no matter if it was just creative or if it was media or an integrated shop. So I've seen through the years just the importance of having a sound strategy, why it's so key, because basically if you don't, you're really wasting a lot of time. And about a year ago, I decided that the holding company model was just feeling a bit sluggish. There's opportunities and amazing people and talent and clients as well that I've been really fortunate to work with, and the brands and the agency brands I have worked with in the past. But I was just craving something different because we move so fast these days. The world is pretty much crazy, for lack of a better phrase. And business as well is super dynamic as a result. And so I was actually going to start doing my own thing, kind of like a strategic creative consultancy, whereby I would bring in a client and I would loop in people that I knew had the right background for the given assignment. And as I was explaining this model to a friend, he said, have you ever heard of this other company called Been There, Done That? It's basically what they've been doing the past 7 years. And I said, no. And so I started interviewing just about a year ago with this company, which now I am their chief global growth officer. And we started just having a very genuine discussion about the model and why it's so relevant and how it can work. And so I have been with this company for about the past 7 months now. And ultimately what we do is very much strategy front and center. We work in an agile on-demand model where for every piece of client business we have, we work with our community. And there are 350 people worldwide in about 28 markets. So they come from obviously different parts of the world, but they also bring something different to the table. So most of them are chief strategy officers, chief creative officers that are doing part-time with us. Maybe they're still employed somewhere and they want something different, or maybe they're doing this full-time, kind of what we like to call like this open talent approach, which has really been transformative in the past couple of years. But we started doing this 7 years ago. So we've really had like a proper system and talent, a pool of talent to support the current demands of client business these days and the demands of brands especially. And so many of us have come from the creative advertising world and strategy. So we have been playing in this marketing space, but we do so many different things across the board, whether it be innovation, different sustainability modules, basically you name it. But it all comes down to strategy and creativity as these foundational pieces. And the model that we have is what we call a 1-week sprint in the most simple format. So a client can engage with us, say, we've got this problem in understanding how to activate a sustainability platform, or we need a sustainability platform and then an activation. And so we work with the client through, it's just a 1-week process where we start with problem definition, which is basically a 2-hour strategy session where we get to the root of what's going on and what we're actually trying to solve for. And brands always say it's like therapy because everyone gets a seat at the table. We come in and we're just like this neutral party and we just kind of crack open the gaps and just try and find like what's really going on from everyone's perspective, which is so key because we've had people from the media side, the creative side, different agencies that the brand might work with, people from the tech side, procurement. So we really want everyone that has a relevant role to be there to openly speak their mind. Once we do that, we create a brief and we take that to our community and we curate 3 members from the community that we know are best suited to solve for the problem. And the community members have about 2 or 3 days to think through what they're trying to solve for. And then they give us their ideas. And then we present to the client by the end of the week 9 concepts. It's sometimes more, sometimes a little less, but ultimately just super, super great thinking.
Yeah.
And when we do these presentations, I'm truly blown away because the alchemy of minds that we bring together from the community is just really special. And
Yeah.
it's really fun because we don't lose any momentum, because it's like, here's the problem, what do you think we need to solve for it? And I can say that being at different types of organizations, sometimes you get a brief and it goes through like so many stakeholders and partners, and like you kind of lose like the energy and you lose the interest. And so what's great about this is that it's just so fast. So it's pretty fun right now.
That's awesome. And do you know what else I love about that is sometimes we think that strategy and speed can't go hand in hand. We think that it's one or the other.
Mm-hmm.
We either think that it's like go, 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 go,
Totally.
figure it out on the back end, or that it's like strategy quarter by quarter, year by
Mm-hmm.
year. But like we don't think about the fact that, and this is what's really interesting, this idea of like when they say like when you don't pay the dummy tax, I mean you pull the people in the room who already have the experience, who already know what they're doing, they're allowed to think creatively, they're given that bandwidth, and it's just like, hey, like throw all of your best ideas out here. You can actually come up with something pretty
Yeah.
quickly.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, like, part of our process, like, we've built this codified way of working that is, I want to say it's kind of like a rinse and repeat, although the problem is always different. So it's always exciting and nuanced. But we've got this set process that just works. And yeah, it's a really fun place to be.
Super cool. So another question I have for you on the strategy front is that I feel like sometimes business owners of all sizes, when like something's not working, they're stuck, they're plateaued, like, but they don't know, do they need a business strategy? Do they need
Hmm.
a brand strategy? Do they need a marketing strategy? Do they need a PR strategy? Do they need a, like, how might you advise people who are like, how do I even start with strategy? Like, what strategy do I even need?
Yeah, well, we'd probably do a problem definition and we'd go through like all the questions, all the needs, the different like various stakeholder needs and thoughts, and then we that's where we kind of net out with a brief, and ultimately we advise like, we think you need this, but we don't. The interesting thing that really differentiates us, which I didn't mention, is that we don't do any execution. So the client might we might net out and be like, right, like PR feels like it should be front and center, and that's probably going to be an idea that comes from our community, but we will just provide the client with these thoughts, and then they will source, a third party as necessary, whether it be production or PR. But most of them are pretty massive organizations that typically will have retained agencies in place already, or they have an in-house operation, an in-house studio. So it's very easy for them to just take the information and the ideas that we give them and just and do it.
That's so cool. So, kind of segueing a little bit, talking about these really top companies and brands, which you've had the opportunity to work with, throughout your career and make an impact. I'm really curious what you're seeing from your vantage point, your, expertise in PR, your love for sustainability, your experience with strategy. Everyone's kind of talking about the moment in time that is Web3. Like
Mm-hmm.
everything's going to change again. And I'm curious kind of what your viewpoints are or what you're seeing on the ground from the brands that you're working with that everyone should know, like what's happening now in this moment that people should be paying attention to.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, very timely. I'd say, I mean, mostly it's like the kind of circular economy and the collective economy. And what I think is most interesting is how brands are showing up in a genuine way. And not to sound cliche, because obviously everyone always needs to be authentic and genuine, but how are they adding value to the end consumer in new ways? Like, how are
Yeah.
they enabling the end consumer, like, who should sit at the heart of everything they do anyway, to, monetize whatever they're trying to monetize, or just get involved with the brand in a different way? And it's a much deeper conversation, because obviously every brand is so different, whether it's a parent company or the individual brands in a portfolio. And so there's a lot to unpack, but I think ultimately it comes down to like, what's that DNA of the brand, and how do they want to like manifest that in this very wild west new space, and make sure that they're really showing up for their people.
Yeah. I mean, what's something to kind of pull that thread a little bit that you see brands doing that you think they're either really getting right or really getting wrong when it comes to showing up genuinely right now? Is there anything that you, whether it's professionally or even just a personal passion point, you're like, oh, I wish that like brands were doing this or weren't doing that in this vein?
Yeah, I'd say probably like, I feel like a couple years ago, like when more purpose and impact types of work and causes became front and center, I think a lot of brands started to show up and do things that were just so off. And I think that that's kind of calmed down a bit, which is good. And I think it's probably because one, brands realize they can't stand up for everything because in the past they haven't. So if they start to say, yeah, we support, like human rights, but they've never done anything that, it's like there's an incongruency that comes along with that. And then I think that unfortunately also there's so many causes these days that like it's like one thing after the next. And I don't want to say unfortunately, but sometimes there's a lot of things that need attention, and
Yeah.
it's pretty overwhelming as well. And so I think that brands probably realize that they can't simply just stand up for like everything that's going to be of the moment.
Totally. Like better to kind of do it right than be performative and just throw the graphic
Yeah,
on.
exactly. Like pick the things that like are that you have been doing that you know you have a right to play in or around or support and help develop as well. And that's kind of like part of the whole sustainability space and really initiatives. When you look at the SDGs, it's like there's 17 global goals. Like that's a perfect framework to not only start but to really like dig into and decide like. And there's a lot of different like specific ways that you can do that. There's like sub goals under the goals, and so it's quite prescriptive in terms of like if you need direction, if you really want the playbook, like just do a little research and then kind of back end that into your operation, and figure out the right way to show up.
Yeah, and actually, you read my mind by going to sustainability because we're talking about causes. That's where I wanted to go next because you've done such incredible work in sustainability. You're so knowledgeable about it. I mean, literally judging at Cannes Lions on a sustainability panel. And for anyone who's listening who doesn't know what that is, that's like the advertising awards. I don't know how to explain it. But it's interesting. I was interviewing Josh Felser, who's a climate tech VC, on the show a few weeks ago, and he was saying how he feels that climate tech is the opportunity in business right now, but so many business owners aren't paying attention to it. And interestingly, from a PR perspective, a lot of it's kind of around the PR, right? People think that sustainability and climate is specifically green or specifically political or is elitist or is this or is that or may not apply to them or their brand. So I know it's something you're so knowledgeable about, you're so passionate about. Like, let's talk a little bit about how brands can lean into sustainability or businesses can lean into sustainability and increase their success by doing so.
Yeah, I mean it's a meaty question, and I think it's at everyone's like top of the list, like to be net zero. And I mean some of the brands out there, right, that you look at, like let's say like a Unilever, right? I mean, or a P&G. A lot of people like to point fingers because they're like, oh well, you're using plastic, and you're the problem. Um, and I know, I have friends that work at NGOs that will still roll their eyes, even though they're kind of doing business with some of these companies, because they just feel like it's, again, like how you start an operation and like walking the walk instead of talking the talk. But I do feel like businesses like that also have the opportunity to influence because they have such a wide reach with their audiences to the products they're actually putting out in the world. And so I think one piece of that is, and we're starting to see it. I mean, we should see it faster, but the things that are actually available, like you want to create more conscious consumption, you need to create a conscious product and replace and start eliminating some of the things. And I forget what brand it was, but I saw in the store yesterday, like a bamboo razor, like front and center with all the other razors. And I was like, awesome, like step in the right direction, check. But I think that similarly to your point, like when it comes to climate tech, there's also kind of this turning point of putting the power back in the hands of the consumer to do things differently.
Yeah.
And for example, I have a friend who's is building this product that's tokenomics behind it, but a token is received every time you make a smart choice in travel. So you can walk instead of taking a car and things like that. And I think that'll work very well in urban environments. But his point is like we're taking action to stop waiting for kind of brands to do it, but do it yourself. And it's a nice kind of incentive because the consumer actually can monetize their green choices. So I think when it comes to climate tech as well, that's a really interesting space that should not go ignored either. And perhaps, there very well may be an intersection of brands that can also sponsor a platform like that, or just begin to use their resources in different ways. So I think, to your friend's point, like, that's definitely a useful space and a different way to go about branding as
It's
well.
so interesting too, because to your point, there are opportunities there. There are market opportunities there, and there are marketing opportunities there. Like, I'm
Yeah.
literally thinking about what you're saying about a bamboo razor, and I'm thinking about everything around how that could be marketed in a way and how that would open up, people who would be more interested in buying that product specifically. And are people thinking about that? Toward that end, I saw that Jeff. So one thing about Fireside is that there's like some Clubhouse vibes, so we can pull people up and make questions. So if you have questions, definitely raise your hand and you can come on up and drop them in the chat. Jeff, I saw that you had a question. Welcome to the stage. And what is your question for Tara?
Yeah, hi Sarah and hi Tara. Thank you, Sarah, for bringing me up. I think that's great. You raised up a really good point, Tara, and I just had a question for you, and I'll pause afterwards. And the question is, I'm a startup founder of a CPG product, and it's TPO based. It's a silicone based product. It's a tennis and pickleball accessory, actually, that goes on the end of the racket or paddle and
Okay.
picks up the ball. So, one of the things is to be a conscious, seller, and I want my consumers to be conscious too. Any suggestions for a bootstrapped, startup founder on ways to, work in that environmental piece? And I'll pause the mic.
Well, first, I have to say that that sounds like a very clever invention, because my parents just moved down to a community in North Carolina, and they love pickleball, but everyone gets hurt playing pickleball, which is kind of hilarious to me. Not to make a joke out of it, but I think what I'm saying is your device sounds like it could be very useful and save many twisted ankles and knees. Um, so I'll start with that. But I think, yeah, I mean, the metrics and the transparency that you can show on what you're introducing into the world is really important. And I think putting that front and center helps consumers understand the value behind their purchase. And so, from the fashion perspective, I think like Everlane, Reformation, they were, a few years ago, some of the brands that really started to show how the results of using less water can impact the planet positively. And I think it's kind of the information like that you do the work in measuring your efforts as an operation and business, and then you're able to showcase that and explain in a really easy way. So that's one thing I'd suggest doing, and that can just be clearly like on your website, like woven into social posts and things like that. And yeah, I mean, I think it all starts with a lot of education still. I started particularly blogging a few years ago around sustainable travel in specific, because my feeling at the time was that there wasn't any awareness around sustainable travel. And so I went to content as that method to start getting attention. And then through the years, there's been more and more like these conscious bloggers and eco warriors, if you will, that have come out, and which is a good sign, right? Because more people are talking about it. But I think that with you, it's also just that, how you as a business operate, and proving it and backing it by metrics is a great starting point.
Awesome. Thank you. It totally makes sense. And it's something that I can absolutely bake into the message, especially the, like the mission statement and all that stuff. It needs to be reworked anyway. And I'm sort of in this middle of doing a little bit of a brand refresh. So as I do that, I'm definitely want to incorporate, hey, this is it can be a sustainable product. It,
Mm-hmm.
maybe, incorporate some kind of recycle program at some point we had thought about, with some of the camps, clubs, and academies that use it.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah, and
appreciate that.
yeah, absolutely. And that's another great way, like, the reusability and recycling efforts and the partners that you decide to involve in something like that could be really interesting too, right? Like, is it, like Boys and Girls Club, like, because that's also sustainable, right? That's also like part of what being a conscious consumer is looking to different audiences that have a need to use what you're creating. So I think you're on the right track.
Thank you so much. And thanks for the kind words. And I'll have to get some of those poppets down there to your.
Yeah, please send
We'll
samples
send
to
it to you.
avoid hospital
I'll
bills.
reach out to you on the back channel and happy to send
Sounds
anything.
good.
It's so funny. Yeah. Thank you so much, Tara. And
Good
I
luck.
appreciate Sarah for.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining, Jeff. And thank you, Danielle and Steph, for your comments. Thank you to everyone who's in the room today. So actually, one of the things that I love about that, Tara, is that I feel like it talks to both of the steps that we were kind of just touching on earlier in this show, which is that it starts with the strategic thinking. Like you're saying, is it about recyclability? Is it about partners? What is it about materials? Like, what is it? Like, you have to come up for yourself with the product, with what actually you're doing that's beneficial, and then message that out and see how you can leverage that. So I love how that kind of pulled those two threads together in that question. Jeff, so you started talking, Tara, about the conscious connoisseur and about sustainable travel, which is like perfect. Every time I'm going to ask you a question, you like go there and answer before. So I just want to thank you for reading my mind today.
No problem.
Talk to me about that a little bit. Talk to me about, I have so many questions here, but I'm going to start here. I think that there are a lot of people who wonder both personally and professionally how they're going to successfully be multi-passionate. So like if there's someone who's like, I, want to do content around a sustainable travel blog and I want to be VP of growth at a major company and I want to, do this and I want to do that. There are some people who are thinking that they're in that old school thinking that you still have to do that in sequential order. So my first question for you is talk to me a little bit about how it all fits together to pursue kind of multiple points of passion and impact within your career and your daily life.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think for me, it's probably a particularly like unique, and maybe not, but I started in a space that was a media creative territory, right? Like I've been with these agencies. And so while it's a very different kind of skill set, ultimately like starting from a place where I understood brand and messaging and the importance of PR helped me kind of understand how to create something. So that was fun. I mean, and I did it at a time when I was taking a break from my 9 to 5, and so I did have some space to think through like what I wanted to do. But I will say, like, it wasn't as strategic as it was like passion driven.
Yeah.
And so I just knew, like, I was like, I'm going to be traveling. I want to be able to do something and collect my experiences, but also share them in a way that's meaningful. Because like I said, at the time, I think anytime I opened Instagram in like 2016, 2017, it was like a very kind of flashier version with messaging that felt really flat, actually like hardly any messaging. Everyone was still like just posting pictures of whatever. And so that was kind of the starting point. But it's challenging because it takes, I think, especially now when it comes to, if you're looking at the social space, I mean, it's very demanding, as you know, to create content syndicated across platform. And I have actually kind of taken a back seat a little bit with everything going on because, I've been done that about 7 months ago, and I really wanted to put that front and center. But I will say that everything that I had built in the past few years has no doubt shaped like my overall understanding of the world of sustainability, which is very, very big. I mean, I'm talking through a marketing lens, not like an expert in packaging. And so like with the Cannes Lions, like you mentioned before, like there's no doubt that like what I had started enabled me to be asked to judge last year, because I work with a lot of brands on my own, like SAP in particular, and even Unilever, from kind of one-off influencer things to larger engagements where it was like a whole content plan, events, interviews, like all the multiple media executions. And so it was also really interesting, just as a marketer, less influencer figure, to understand like where the business and the brands are trying to move from a much larger space, as opposed to just like one channel of influencer engagement stuff. But it's also, it validated and showed me like years ago that influencer marketing is here to stay, and it's just going to keep like blossoming in a sense. But I think, for me right now, like I never really wanted to be an influencer at all, and I still don't consider myself one at all. But it's taught me a lot too about having executed in that way, like how it all works, like the mechanics, and like lots of like a crash course. I gave myself like a crash course and all that. So I do still see that channel important in brand communications when there's a fit. But it's really tough. It's tough to do both. But like I said, like I think to have an online business these days is so demanding from a content perspective that you really have to be on it, and you can't really ignore the spaces that make sense for you. But it takes a lot of time.
Well, first, I'm so grateful for your transparency that I was like, how do you do both? And you're like, well, one took precedence and then the other took precedence and then one took precedence. And I think anytime that we can debunk this idea that there are just like superhumans out there who do everything like hustle culture and like it's so like, first of all, I love the fact that you were so open about the fact that doing both looked different at different stages based on what was taking precedence. My next question for you, when you say kind of like, oh yeah, well, I partnered with this brand and then I partnered with that brand, I know that there are going to be people like watching the replay who will be like drooling over this portion, right, of the show, because people are always, there's like a very kind of aspirational moment right now for content creators that they want to be influencers, they want to be partnering with brands, they have no idea how to go about it. So my question for you is, did a lot of that happen kind of organically based on the relationships that you already had in the space? Or is there advice that you can give to anyone who's listening who's like, well, I want to do that. What can I do?
Yeah. It didn't happen from existing relationships. I've found that the most interesting partnerships I have been inbound, and I think that's kind of like the way it always is in business. You present yourself in a certain way, you start to build a brand reputation, and business comes to you. Which is the ideal scenario, right? I've definitely spent way too much time pitching brands that kind of wasn't worth it. Low ROI, let's just leave it at that. And I just don't think that, especially in the influencer space, I think it's highly commoditized. And, I've seen it like from rates that I used to pitch brands with, even having like a sixth of the following I have now, to what brands or the inbound brands at least are offering me. And it's like, it's insulting. You know what I mean? It's like, this is like, no, like absolutely not. So I think, when it comes to the influencer marketing space, and I'm sure many of the listeners have heard this before, it's all about diversity of revenue streams. I really wouldn't put brand partnerships front and center. I would consider, a few key partners and relationships, if you have them, that make sense, that you can do like long-term engagements and you can have a contract and it's a nice chunk of change that you're happy with and all that. And then the other thing I'd say is, for those that really want to lean into it, is just be wary of how many hours you're actually going to put in, because what I've noticed as well is a lot of these brands will have like certain payment platforms where they basically make the influencer do the work in terms of like sharing metrics and updating like payment information. And it's just like this admin stuff that like adds up, and like that should be part of your rate. Like that's, so it's kind of a little sneaky thing that I've realized in a past couple of the few engagements I've done. So I decline things often, one, because it's an embarrassing offer. I'm like, no. And secondly, just because, it's not a focus for me. It's not a business that feels truly impact like driven. And there's stuff I have done for free, like the UN, for example. They have their World Food Program has an initiative every year, and they don't pay me, but I'll support them. So there's things like that, and I think it's the stuff like that where it's all about showing up. And again, back to like the whole what do you stand for, being authentic. But if there's true alignment between what the messaging and the influence you want to create in the world with a partner that you feel is legit, then I think those things are totally acceptable and they should be explored. And that's where I think you'll start to see like other brands, if you're interested in the brand deals, come back to you and it's like, oh, right, you stand for this. That's awesome. We appreciate that. And we want to be part of that narrative too.
So talk to me about, because I'll be candid with you, I think that there are some people who feel like they've been trying and trying and trying and creating and creating and creating, and no one's noticed them. Like they're really feeling like if a tree falls in the forest, but no one's around to hear it. And so kind of the suggestion that the best deals are inbound, there might be people who are like, well, what am I doing wrong? Like I'm creating and creating and creating and nobody's noticing me. And I'm curious from your perspective, if there are kind of anything that that you've identified that maybe you've seen that people get wrong about that, to be candid. So maybe, because I know that you were saying that you were getting inbound even when you had a sixth of the audience that you had now, and we know that nano influencers are a thing, so it's not simply audience building.
Yeah.
Do you think that people are maybe misjudging the quality of their content, misjudging the market fit? That like, what should they school themselves up on? Like, do they need to get a little bit more of a marketing background if that's something that they actually want, so that they know the voice that they're putting out there in the world? Like, I'm just curious because I know that people will be like, well, that sounds amazing, but how do I get that?
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say it's so much like get a marketing background. I think, content creation, I think it's back to where we started. It's a lot of strategy and it's a lot of creativity. Like copywriting skills, important, but also like that red thread of who you are as like, what is the brand or what is your personal brand, and keeping that consistent is so, so necessary, and being consistent, which is something I've really struggled with as well lately, because it's so hard to keep showing up, especially when you're not seeing the results you want, but to keep showing up when you're trying to focus on something else. For me, it became very challenging. But I think it's like also figuring out like what's your spot. Like if you want to work with brands, like what's your short list of targets, and like do you focus on say like 10 of them in a way where you genuinely like really study the brand, understand their pain points, understand where they're going, and begin to message or create content that will resonate with them and attract them. But also, their end consumer too. Like if you're going to position yourself as a creator to inevitably like sell one of their products to one of their consumers, like who is their consumer?
Right.
Do you reflect part of that? Do you have them following you?
No, I think you're so right, because there are two things that you hit on there that I think are really important. First is the whole kind of 3 feet from gold idea, that like you have to just keep showing up even when it sucks, and it's not always going to feel great, and it's not always going to be convenient. But second of all, to your point, it to me really sounds like when you're saying, are they thinking about the brand and the end user? Like I think about all of the influencers who got their deals because they were already doing the hauls, right? That's why like the fashion brand reached out to them, because they were already doing these really well edited, attractive hauls of the clothes, or the people who are partnering with anything in the kind of food and cookware space because they were already making really cool cooking videos. Like, and I think that sometimes people who are like, why haven't they found me yet? To be candid, like a lot of them are just replicating kind of like a fashion forward influencer styled feed, and not actually thinking about what the brands and the brand audience member is using, is doing, is thinking, is feeling, is wanting to see. I feel like that's like a super light bulb moment for anyone who's listening. Like you shouldn't just have a color coordinated feed of you like looking gorgeous. It's like, what is actually the relevant content there?
Yeah, totally. And it's challenging because like the Instagram grid, just using that as an example of a platform has really shifted from make it perfect to like make it valuable. So, but again, it's like such an ego driven thing, right? Like, am I doing this for me to like feel like this is what I want to have out there? And it's challenging because it comes back to like what you offer as a creator. Like, what is your skill set? Like, if you're a photographer, it's probably a different story from whether or not you are a fashion blogger focused on sustainable fashion. And therefore, yes, the hauls and the like snappy, fun transition videos and all that are going to be important for you to showcase because it's ultimately your portfolio.
I love that so much. And I love that we keep coming back to strategy. It actually reminds me of another interview I did. The first person I interviewed on this show, his name's Michael Rubin, and he was like an original employee at Netflix and Adobe and Lucasfilms and all these places. And one of the things that he was talking about in his kind of cohort was the frustration that back in the day, once you hit a certain point of your career, you were a master. Like you were an apprentice, and then you were a career person, and then you were the master, you were the mentor, and you could kind of just rest on your knowledge. And he was saying that it's a frustration that as the tech and as the tools evolve, if you want to stay at the top of your field, you have to keep learning the tech and the tools, and you have to do that to stay relevant. And that's the other piece that's really kind of flagging for me here that I'm finding really interesting in this discussion as we're kind of troubleshooting. I feel like the questions that I hear from people all the time around like, well, why am I not getting that inbound interest? And it's like, when you were saying like, well, do you have the snappy transition videos, or are you focused on is your portfolio? Like, how are you really going about the content that you're creating in the world towards your end goal, which is just super, super impactful, I feel like.
Yeah, and like I said, like back to why I'm also just taking a pause on everything is because, for one, it's like the demand of content, but more importantly for me, like valuable content. And if I'm focused really a lot on like conscious creativity and sustainability, I can't do like some like fashion haul video. Like that doesn't, that's not what I'm trying to showcase. So, and there's a lot of, and I've noticed this as well with a lot of like eco-conscious bloggers, like there's like a ton of research that goes into a lot of the content that some of my favorite people are creating. And that's like an extreme, like heavy lift. It's not just like I can do this and create this video. It's like I am researching things and like, it's deep. It's like really, and you want to be factual. And as you know, as a writer, like the fact checking and just making sure your sources are clear and you're not like spreading fake news. And so it's highly time consuming and for like what payoff, right? And that's where it can get frustrating too, because it's definitely, it easily is a 100% full-time job. So
I just love the fact that we're demystifying and debunking this, like even talking about the research that goes into it, because so many people say, why am I not breaking through the noise? Why am I not breaking through the noise? And it's because the quote unquote influencer experience or the brand partnership experience is so glamorized that I think people sometimes say it's the research, it's the strategy, it's the content, it's the nitty gritty, it's building things for their end user. So, I mean, I personally am sitting here like thinking through my content, just appreciating this show and this conversation. So much. So, I mean, again, there are so many things that you're an expert on. Also, reading your bio, I didn't realize that you were a yogi. I'm like, I definitely want to hit up a yoga class with you already.
I love yoga.
My question for you with this kind of like broad-based knowledge that you have, right, in the creative space, in the PR space, with brands, with strategy, with sustainability, as an influencer, let's talk about and we talked about this a bit earlier, but like things are shifting right now, right? Like literally the digital ecosystem is shifting all around us, and people are saying, should I be focused on the metaverse? Should I be focused on NFTs? And I'm kind of curious, maybe how you're seeing some of these newer opportunities and newer ways to engage with audiences, if it's something that you're seeing either for you or your clients, like any really cool projects that you've been a part of or things that you can share with the audience so that they can kind of think more expansively in this time.
Yeah, I mean, probably one of the most interesting clients we have is the Ad Council. And so they have many different brands that partner with them. And a lot of the work is very purpose driven and oriented. And we did a campaign with them. We did all of the strategic platform. And like I was talking about before, the problem definition sessions over and over again with so many stakeholders to get America vaccinated. So that was a couple of years ago, and a really massive, like a really, really
they
big,
can clap on this platform too.
I was like, ooh, I like that. Big project. And as a result, we have been engaged with them on an anti-systemic racism platform as well, and project that's been ongoing for quite a while. It hasn't launched yet, but it's work like that is like that's really important stuff. And so we like to say, I've been there, done that. We harness the world's best thinkers to solve the world's toughest problems. And, that's one of the world's toughest problems.
So. I mean, first of all, thank you. Like, that's incredible. That's incredible work. I love that you just talked with literally, like, as you said, two of the biggest problems of our time that you're working through. So another question that I have, so we've talked about really the importance of strategy. If I'm a business owner and I have the opportunity to get an extraordinary strategy, how do I not fumble the ball? What do I do next? Like, how do I know that like I can actually take this playbook and do what I'm meant to do with it? What's something that you tell people to do next and to think about as far as like actually living out a strategy and not just like shoving it in the drawer?
Yeah, I mean, it needs to be front and center and referenced as needed and just it has to influence every other moving piece. So it's kind of a funny question because it depends on like, are you just an individual crafting your own strategy? Or are you like a massive organization that has other parties that will help you execute that strategy? Um, but yeah, I mean, it needs to be like everywhere. It needs to be throughout whatever it is that you're trying to do.
I mean, I think even that I know is going to help someone listening because so often I think people say we need to create the strategy, but then they don't think about the fact, like you're saying, of, for example, making sure that every single team and department is aware of what it is
Hmm.
and how,
Yeah,
something will implement every kind of every thread of the fabric. You know what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah. And it comes like from like the agency side of, my career, it's been always like in the brief, right? Like, and then what's like the different ways agencies call things, but like a brand platform, like the creative idea, the, big brand idea, stuff like that. But ultimately it's like that one phrase or essence that will inspire the work to come from like, so it can be, as simple as referencing the brand platform for like copywriting. It can be referencing it for, like a larger like creative campaign. So it really is the thing that's kind of like front and center that simplifies all the work that went into it in like one sentence or less, a couple words maybe.
Well, and I love that too, because too often I think that we actually distill out things like company culture and talent acquisition, and all of these things that are the humans creating the thing at the company from what the company creates. And I love this idea that if you have that platform in a succinct way so that everyone knows it, everyone lives it, everyone who's coming in, there's like
Mm-hmm.
there's an immediate almost like culture fit if it's known, if it's written down, if it's clear, and if it can be disseminated out to everyone. Like I think that
Yeah,
that's so powerful.
totally. And like that's why, the integrated agencies I've worked at have been the most interesting and effective because they're integrated because everyone is listening to what the strategy ultimately is at the center, and like everyone from different disciplines is they're in the same room, and so everyone's perspective can they just feed off each other in a really positive way that generates better work. So yeah.
That's so good, Tara. That's so good. There have been so many parts of the show that I just want to be like, clip that, people. Like, share
Ah.
that out. Remember that. Lean into that. Thank you for the applause, everyone.
Oh yeah, I
I
love
do want
that sound.
to just mention once again, if you have a question, if you have a comment, if you would like to come up, please feel free. We would love to hear from you. So, Tara, one of the things that I always want to make sure to ask, because it's just such a like free flowing conversation, is I'm also curious. From you, we've had the opportunity to hear a little bit about both the work you're doing at Been There, Done That, and at the Conscious Connoisseur. But I'm curious if there's anything that you like specifically really want to share with everyone who's listening or on YouTube right now or watching the replay. Like, if there's something that you're like, dang, I want Sarah to ask me about this before we wrap. Like, is there something that it's like, let's lean into this in the discussion? Let's talk about it. Like, what else is like, or what more on is something that you're passionate about right now?
Oof, that's a very deep question. Well, I mean, how I've been living my life the past couple of years, which for everyone that doesn't know, it's been kind of nomadic by default. So I am a native Long Islander, but I've been in New York City for a majority of my career. And I moved out July 2020 and ended up kind of on this journey of sorts where I have spent a lot of time in the Caribbean, and I'm kind of on the move a bit because I'm trying to reroute myself somewhere, but it's still a bit of a question mark. Um, so I suppose, yeah, I mean, it's just like it's quite personal, but it's just like doing what's back to the whole genuine authenticity piece, like what's right for you. And I think like right now at this time. And like, I still think that we're in this like post COVID, like trauma that no one really talks about in a sense. And like everyone's lives have just changed so significantly. So I think there's something that, when it comes to like the integration of like work-life balance and like how you manage your personal life to your professional life, I just think there's like an interesting space to be explored and be more open about as we carry on, like what is normal these days for you versus like just like in a kind of mental health kind of check-in area, because I think a lot of people have just experienced so much change and it's been crazy, and I don't think we like pause enough to respect that.
Do you know what I find really inspiring about that point is that so often we look at remote work environment or hybrid work environment like these kind of stiff HR terms. I almost said PR terms. Like these stiff HR practices of like, oh, well, people need the opportunity to work remotely, and we think of it in terms of like, people just needing to be able to take Zooms from home and like not build their commute back in, or, whatever the case may be. But this idea, and to your point, it does get back to a little bit what we were talking about earlier, that if organizations are able to build in that flexibility, what people can pursue, when we think about making the world smaller, when we think about the fact that people can move, obviously, Airbnb being in the news recently for saying that people can work from anywhere, and remotely forever, and so on and so forth. But like this idea that remote work means more than wearing your sweatpants and being on Zoom calls, which is like totally a misnomer. But like you're saying, it really is the opportunity for people in this time to have a takeaway post COVID where they're like, where do I want to live? What life do I want to invent? Like,
It's a challenge. It's like the paradox of choice, like I was updating my bio before we started, and I like I didn't know what to put, so I just put like a palm tree and a city landscape emoji. Because I was like, I don't know, I love like the island life. It gives me such like grounding and peace and like nurturing, because I love nature, and when I'm in the city, it's like very functional from a business perspective, but not from like a holistic perspective. So
yeah.
it's this very like, I mean, I couldn't think of like two more like clashing like end of spectrum places to be, like New York City versus the Caribbean, you know what I mean? So it's definitely like back to my point on reflecting. It's like it's trying to look at things like somewhat like objectively and understand their place in your world, but it's definitely like a challenge that I've created for myself. But I think again, like many people, especially like around our age, it's an opportunity, but it's not an easy like code to crack, or it's not an easy path to go down.
I agree with you. And I also think how powerful it is to have someone such as yourself who's achieved so much success talk openly about that. Because again, like when I kind of think about all the takeaways from this conversation, there are so many things that we oversimplify, that we glamorize, whether it's being an influencer, whether it's, travel, that as you're saying, there's actually, if you're a reflective person, as you said, there's a lot of thinking and feeling and exploring that goes behind it. And I love the idea that someone can both be, so successful and so put together, and also be exploring these things and like confidently, openly talking about that, because I hope that it inspires everyone listening to realize that like you can kind of have it all figured out and not all have it figured out at the same time. And that doesn't mean that you're any less successful, achievement oriented, whatever the case may be. Like, I feel like that's just like a super powerful takeaway.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to be honest here. So, and I think it is. I really do think that it is something that, like, back to your point about like HR rigidness and stuff. Like, it's just not something people talk about, but it's something that's so very real still. Like
Yeah.
a lot of people are still working from home, and it's like, yeah, like people were stressed out and having like mental issues for a reason. Like, it's still like it might have become a little more normal, but like doesn't mean that it's still like an okay place to be if you're not okay with that.
Yeah. And again, I love this idea and this takeaway. It's so valuable to say, like, one of the things, again, we're talking about leaning into Web3 in this moment in time and getting back to what you were saying about how people are right now, maybe more than ever, or maybe just more allowed to than ever, be pulled to genuine messaging and honesty. And the fact is, you're saying people have always been feeling this way, but we're in a moment where we can talk about it and we
Hmm.
can reach people who are more receptive to listening to it. And I just, again, like, I'm super grateful because I knew that we were going to talk a little bit about strategy and a little bit about brands and influencers and so many things. And I think the fact that we kind of keep coming back to this notion of, put the work in, have the roadmap, but also like just be honest and be transparent along the journey, is just such an important takeaway. And I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful you spent this time with me this morning. So
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you to tell everyone listening, watching the replay, where they can find you, how they can stay in touch with you. Yeah, clap it up for Tara. Thank you.
Yeah. You can find me on LinkedIn, Tara Nolan. BeenThereDoneThat.co is the website of BeenThereDoneThat if you want to check it out. .co, not .com. If you're interested in some strategy and creative brand work, etc., in a super valuable way, give me a shout. And yeah, thanks, Sarah.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being here on Fireside today. Now you know a little bit more about the platform. We're so grateful that you are here.